Hello everyone, how's it going? Today we're back with another video summarizing another chapter from IB Business Management. Today it is chapter 2.2, which is organizational structures. Sorry for the hair. It's been a long night of studying for me, so I'm a bit, this is my appearance. But anyway, this chapter is actually relatively simple. It's dealing with a couple simple ideas of organizations and how they're managed. However, there are also important things to know to be able to understand the rest of really the business management syllabus, because this is kind of a foundational part of the other parts, but it is important to know these. But yeah, there's nothing really complicated. Anyway, we'll get right into it. So the first thing that this chapter deals with, obviously the name is organizational structures. Well, its first topic is organizational structure, which is simply defined as the way a company is organized. That's to say, what are the managers? How are those managers, managing the different employees? How many levels? Things like that. And generally, you make the structure of an organization based on your internal practices. Your goal is, look at what's the corporate culture, look at what the employees are, what's the product you're creating, and how can you maximize the efficiency of the company, taking into consideration those internal practices. Now, every organization will have an organizational chart. This is basically just the graphic representation of how the business is organized, seeing the different levels. And there are a few different ways that you can divide a business in terms of how you organize it. One way is by function. So we're talking about the production process. So let's say you have a printing business, all right? You're going to have, one part that is kind of the editing sector, one part that's the printing sector, one part that's the sales sector. So you're dividing it by what each one does. The second way to do it is by product or activity. That's to say the product they produce. So let's say you have a company that's producing cars and it's producing hamburgers. Well, you got the product, you have the car division, you have the hamburger division. So it's dividing it based on their products or the more general things that they're doing. Finally, you can do by region. So if you have a company, let's say in Los Angeles, and then you also have a branch in New York and also a branch in Texas, where you're going to have, your California region, your New York region, and your Texas region. So you're dividing more by geography. Each of these has their own pros and cons. But those are, I think, for the most part, common sense to understand. You just have to know those three. And in their case, what the benefits and disadvantages can be of each one. All right, so next is span of control. So span of control just means the number of people who are directly accountable to a manager. And this affects whether a business is known as wide or narrow. All right, so a wide organization, also known as a flat organization, this is when a manager has a wide span of control. This is to say many people are directly responsible to the manager. The manager manages a very large amount of people. The reason they call this a wide or flat organization is because if you look at the chart of these organizations, they're going to be pretty flat. There's going to be a little thing like this. There might be, you have one level of managers and the employees they manage, and that's it. Because so many people report to them, you don't need many levels. This is typically done in organizations when you have employees who can work independently, because the advantage of this is that you have, the disadvantage is that the employees can't really be watched very well by a manager. Because think, if you're a manager with 100 employees reporting to you, you can't be very responsible for them. However, in an organization that, has much fewer under your purview, and we'll get to that in a sec, much fewer, you can then be a bit more vigilant of your specific employees. However, the advantage of this is that there's better communication because you only have a few superiors. You might have 5 managers, each of them's overseeing a lot of employees, but it's easy to communicate in between the managers and have a good, solid communication because there's not many levels. You just have a couple of major managers. The other form of structuring this is what's known as narrow or tall. This is because when you look at the structure of this business on a graph, it's going to be a tall one. You're going to have lots of levels organizing this business. And that's basically to say that you have a lot of supervisors. Each of them is overseeing a few employees. And you have more hierarchy because, you have your top guy, then you have your managers. And each of those managers maybe is overseeing, 3 sub-managers. And those 3 sub-managers, 3 employees each. So the idea here is that you have a lot better kind of a watch on your employees. You have less independence of the employees. Instead, they're being vigilated because they have someone whose job is pretty much watch them and like 2 other people, versus a company where it could be, a manager has 15 employees. So this allows for more control, and it allows for better decisions and communication within each branch. So each manager can communicate better with their subordinates because there's fewer of them. However, it makes harder communication throughout the company because as a result, you have this huge chart with so many different levels. So if you're one manager over here trying to get communication to your subordinates, but then also these managers here to their subordinates, this manager here to his subordinates, and then them to their subordinate, it's just a whole mess of trying to organize everything. So it is harder to communicate within the business, and you can have a sense of alienation because it's one thing if it's one level of managers and then you're the next level employees and that's it. But if you have this massive structure and if you're sitting at the bottom, you can really feel kind of alienated and like you're less than. Okay, and so then we get into a couple of key terms here. None of these are really complicated. First is delegation. This is just the idea of delegating authority or passing authority or responsibilities to your subordinates. Basically saying, all right, if we're a hamburger company, all right, you're going to flip the burgers, you're going to fry the fries, you're going to make the drinks. And I'm just going to give you each a more specific job. The idea is then you have people that specialize and can be more efficient. Another term is levels of hierarchy. This is what we were mentioning, especially with narrow, tall businesses. These are the levels of different parts of the company. You got your directors, you got your managers, then you got your more local kind of guys, and you got your regular employees. So it's just this level of things moving up and down. All right, and then there's the layering or downsizing. This is the process of flattening a business. As you remember, a flat business is one with a very flat structure, very few levels. So flattening is getting rid of these levels, trying to remove managers and either put everyone on the same level or just reduce kind of the complexity of your bureaucracy and of your system. Next, we have the chain of command. This is basically the order in which things pass up and down the levels of the business. You start on the employees and you go to their immediate superior, then the manager, then the director, then the CEO. So it's this chain that goes up and down. And then of course orders are coming from the top and then they're traveling down. So that's pretty simple as well. Just the chain of the order, everything goes in. Then we have centralization and decentralization. This is a system you can use to organize a business. And basically, so centralization is, as the name applies, you have one centralized location. If you have your business based in New York, then every decision is made there in New York, and that goes for everywhere. Decentralization is each part of the company. Let's say you have a headquarters in New York, but then you have offices in Boston and Florida and Pennsylvania and California and Hawaii. And then each of those offices can make their own decisions based on what their needs are. There are different advantages to this. In some ways, you have a more consistent vision when you're centralized than if you're decentralized. However, it's less efficient. You're not as adaptable, especially if one office needs something. It's a lot harder to adapt. And you have a lot of stress on superior officers in a centralized organization because they're the ones making all of the decisions. Versus central or decentralization, there's less continuity between the parts of the business, but they're more adaptable, they're more efficient, and usually there's fewer costs. To make a decision on this, there's various factors to take into account, such as size of the organization, the scale of importance of the decision, the level of risk, the corporate culture, the management attitude, the management's competence, and the information technology you have, your ability to communicate between the different parts. If you can communicate really well, then centralization can work. But if you can't, you're going to have to use a decentralized system. All right, then the next part is the Handy's Shamrock organization. This is something I mentioned in the previous chapter, but if you guys have not watched that, basically, so the Handy's Shamrock organization is the idea of an organization that has a core part, a core of managers and major employees that are the central part of the organization. And then you have the other parts that are outside of that. For example, you then have, you have your offshored or outsourced workers. And then you have your temporary workers, your more flexible workers, that they work as supports for the central core. So that's what a shamrock, because you imagine a shamrock has, the three kind of cloves on it, right? Central clove is the core, the most important parts of the business. Then you have your outsourced workers of I'm outsourcing. And again, if you guys don't know what outsourcing is, go to my video on chapter 2.1. I explain it all there. So you have your outsourced workers, and then you have your flexible workers, which are the ones that are, maybe temporary, part-time, things like that. All right, and then we're getting to the end of the chapter right here. The last part is communication. Communication is really important in the business. No matter what the leadership structure or organizational structure is, it is important to have good, solid communication. Important parts of this are clarity of the message, making sure when you communicate something, you're clear. The medium used, whether it's email, telephone, letter, face-to-face, video call, the ability of the receiver to understand the message being given to them for it to be interpreted correctly. And you have to understand cultural differences. This especially goes for multinational corporations. If you have a business in the United States and the UK, you have to understand that some things might be taken different ways. Certain things will be, interpreted differently. And some things won't transfer from culture to culture in between a business and have to be adapted. I think a good example of this isn't exactly applied to marketing relationships, or organization, but it is something with marketing, which was that someone mentioned, or my business teacher showed us this example there was a company that had this slogan that they wanted to advertise with. That was fly in leather. It was some kind of airline. They want to express a sense of luxury. And so they had this expression in English, and then they wanted to advertise in Spanish speaking countries. And of course, Spanish, you then have the language, so you have to translate. And they translated this. And the problem is they translated it literally. And the literal translation is volar en cuero. And the problem is volar en cuero does not mean fly in leather. Like the literal words do mean fly in leather, but the actual translation is to fly naked, because en cuero means naked. So that's just an example of, cultural differences are an important thing that you really have to take into account. Anyway, so I think this is probably the quickest I've got through a chapter in any of these videos, but thank you guys all for sticking around, watching the video. More chapters are coming right up, so I hope you guys will stick around for those. Thank you all for watching. Remember, you can click in the description if you guys need to see any of the other summaries, playlist. I'm putting everything in there. And if you have any questions, of course, you can always comment down below. But thank you all, and have a fantastic rest of your day.